I'll protect you, Noel urged, his voice even as he pinned Maria's trembling body against the rain-soaked alley wall. You're safe now. Maria's lifeless eyes met his, a weak thank you escaping her lips as three blurry figures retreated under his piercing gaze. In the middle of a stormy Chicago night, Noel Jackson, a dashing 25-year-old waiter, becomes an unlikely hero to Maria Caldwell, the grieving CEO of Crimson Orchid. What begins as an innocent act exposes a web of deceit that threatens her legacy. Will Noel's courage light the way, or will hidden dangers engulf them? Dive into this thrilling tale and find out. Do you like gripping stories? Subscribe to our channel to see the latest videos and leave a comment sharing where you're watching. What secrets lurk within Crimson Orchid? Stay to discover the truth. The Chicago night was a beast, all teeth and claws, spitting rain that stung like needles. At 1 a.m., the streets of the South Loop glistened under flickering streetlights, slick with oil and secrets. Noel Jackson, a 25-year-old waiter with a broad frame and eyes that missed nothing, hurried through the downpour. His shift at the Crimson Orchid, the city's crown jewel of fine dining, had dragged past midnight, leaving his legs heavy and his black sneakers soaked. His breath puffed in the chilly air, the collar of his worn leather jacket turned up against the wind. The city hummed around him, distant sirens, the low growl of a late-night bus. But the alley he cut through to reach his apartment was a pocket of silence, broken only by the splash of his steps. Then he saw her. Maria Caldwell, the 38-year-old CEO of the Crimson Orchid, stood swaying at the mouth of the alley, her silhouette sharp against the neon glow of a pawnshop sign. Her auburn hair, usually swept into a flawless chignon, hung loose and damp, clinging to her pale cheeks. Her tailored blazer, worth more than Noel's monthly rent, was crumpled, one sleeve torn at the cuff. She was drunk, painfully so, her steps faltering as she leaned against the brick wall, her fingers clawing for balance. Noel's heart lurched. He'd seen Maria command boardrooms with a voice like steel, but tonight she was a ghost of herself, her eyes glassy with grief. Word around the restaurant was her brother had died 2 weeks ago. A car accident, sudden and cruel. The weight of it seemed to crush her now, her shoulders hunched as if the rain itself pressed her down. Noel slowed, his instincts prickling. Something was wrong, beyond the liquor and the sorrow. His gaze flicked past Maria into the shadows. Three figures loomed at the alley's far end, their outlines blurred by the storm, but their intent was clear. Hooded jackets, hands stuffed in pockets, they moved with the slow, deliberate gait of predators. One tilted his head, whispering to another, and their eyes locked on Maria like wolves spotting a wounded deer. Noel's jaw tightened. He'd grown up in neighborhoods where you learned to read trouble in a glance, and this was trouble, raw and hungry. "Ms. Caldwell," he called, his voice low but firm, cutting through the patter of rain. She didn't turn, her head lolling as she mumbled something incoherent, her breath hitching with a sob. The men took a step closer, their boots scuffing the wet asphalt. Noel's pulse quickened, but he didn't hesitate. He strode forward, his long legs closing the distance, the rain soaking through his jacket. As he reached Maria, she stumbled, her knees buckling beneath her. He caught her, his strong arms steadying her fragile frame against his chest. Her warmth surprised him, soft and vulnerable beneath the damp fabric. "Stay with me," he said, his tone calm but urgent. "You're safe now." Maria's eyes fluttered, meeting his. "Noel?" she slurred, confusion clouding her gaze. A faint spark of recognition flickered, then faded. She sagged against him, her weight trusting despite her haze. Noel's focus shifted to the men, now just 20 feet away. He straightened to his full height, 6'2" of lean muscle, and fixed them with a stare that could cut glass. His deep brown eyes, usually warm, turned cold and unyielding, a silent warning carved in every line of his face. "Not tonight," he said, his voice barely above a growl, meant for them alone. The men froze. The leader, a wiry figure with a scar slicing his eyebrow, sneered but didn't advance. His companions shifted, glancing at each other, uncertainty creeping into their stance. Noel's presence, tall, commanding, unafraid, threw them off. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, his arms steady around Maria as the rain plastered his curls to his forehead. The scar-faced man muttered something, spitting into the gutter, then jerked his head. The trio backed off, melting into the alley's shadows like smoke. Noel watched until their footsteps faded, his heart still hammering. He turned his attention to Maria, helping her to an upright position. "Come on, let's get you out of this," he said, guiding her toward the Crimson Orchid's staff entrance, a rusted metal door tucked behind a dumpster. Her heels scraped the pavement, her steps unsteady, but she leaned into him, her trust instinctive. Noel's mind raced. Why was Maria here, alone and drunk, so far from her Gold Coast penthouse? And those men, who were they? Thieves sniffing out an easy mark? Or something worse? The staff door creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway lit by a buzzing fluorescent bulb. The air smelled of bleach and old grease, a stark contrast to the restaurant's polished dining room. Noel maneuvered Maria inside, her arm slung over his shoulder. He settled her on a worn leather couch in the break room, the springs groaning under her slight weight. Her head tilted back, eyes half closed, a tear streaking her mascara. "He's gone," she whispered, her voice raw. "My brother. Gone." Noel knelt beside her, his expression softening. "I know," he said quietly. He grabbed a water bottle from the mini fridge, twisting off the cap and pressing it into her trembling hands. "Drink this. Slow." She obeyed, her lips quivering as she sipped. He studied her, noticing the purse clutched in her lap, its zipper half open. Papers peeked out, financial documents, their edges crumpled. One caught his eye, an invoice stamped Westfield Consulting, a name unfamiliar despite his 2 years at the restaurant. His gut twisted. Maria wasn't careless. She didn't carry sensitive files on a drunken stumble. Something was off. He tucked the papers back, his fingers brushing the leather. "I'm calling your driver," he said, pulling out his phone. Maria nodded weakly, her eyes drifting shut. As he dialed, Noel's gaze lingered on her. She was a force, sharp, driven, the kind of woman who could silence a room with a glance. But tonight she was fragile, exposed, and it stirred something in him. A need to protect, to understand the shadow circling her. The driver confirmed he'd arrive in 10 minutes. Noel grabbed a clean towel from the supply closet, draping it over Maria's shoulders to ward off the chill. She stirred, her hand grazing his. "Thank you," she mumbled, her voice clearer now, laced with gratitude. "You didn't have to." "Couldn't let you fall out there," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact but warm. He stood glancing at the clock, 1:27 a.m. The rain still pounded outside, a relentless drumbeat. He helped Maria to her feet, steadying her as they moved toward the exit. Her driver's black sedan pulled up, headlights cutting through the storm. Noel opened the door, shielding her from the rain as she slid into the back seat. "Get some rest, Miss Caldwell," he said, closing the door gently. The car pulled away, taillights fading into the mist. Noel stood alone, the alley quiet now, save for the drip of water from a broken gutter. His jacket clung to his shoulders, heavy with rain, but his mind was heavier. Those men, that invoice, Maria's vulnerability, it all gnawed at him. He didn't know what he'd stumbled into, but he knew one thing. This wasn't the end. Something darker waited in the Crimson Orchid's shadows, and Noel Jackson, whether he wanted it or not, was already caught in its grip. The Crimson Orchid's break room was a cocoon of faded comfort, its walls scuffed from years of hurried shifts and whispered gossip. The fluorescent light flickered, casting a sickly glow over the leather couch where Maria Caldwell sat, her hands wrapped around a water bottle as if it were an anchor. Noel Jackson stood by the door, his tall frame filling the space, his dark eyes scanning her with a mix of concern and caution. The rain outside battered the staff entrance, a relentless rhythm that matched the unease coiling in his chest. It was 1:32 a.m. and the night's events. The 3 men in the alley, Maria's drunken collapse, that strange invoice, clung to him like damp clothes. Maria's auburn hair fell in wet strands across her face, her usually sharp features softened by grief and liquor. She sipped the water, her movements sluggish. but her eyes flicked up to meet Noel's. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Out there, you could have walked away." Noel shrugged, leaning against the doorframe, his leather jacket creaking. "Couldn't let you fall, Miss Caldwell," he said, his tone steady but warm, like a fire banked low. He crossed his arms, the muscles in his forearms tensing. "Not how I'm built." His words were simple, but they carried weight, a promise forged in the alley's shadows. Maria's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but a spark of something. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition flashed in her hazel eyes before fading. She set the water bottle on the coffee table, her fingers trembling slightly. "My brother," she started, then stopped, her gaze drifting to the floor. "He was all I had left, and now—" Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Noel's heart twisted. He'd heard the rumors at the restaurant. Maria's brother, killed in a car crash, had been her rock, the one who'd pushed her to build the Crimson Orchid into a Chicago legend. Seeing her now, stripped of her CEO armor, was like watching a lighthouse flicker in a storm. He stepped closer, grabbing a box of tissues from a shelf cluttered with coffee mugs and old schedules. "Here," he said, offering it. She took one, her fingers brushing his, and for a moment, the air between them hummed with unspoken connection. "You don't have to talk," he added, his voice low. "Just breathe." Maria nodded, dabbing her eyes, the mascara smudges making her look younger, more human. Noel's gaze drifted to her purse, still slung across her lap, its zipper gaping. The invoice he'd glimpsed earlier, Westfield Consulting, nagged at him. Why would Maria, meticulous to a fault, carry sensitive financial papers while stumbling drunk through an alley? And those men, who were they? Opportunists or something more calculated? His street-honed instinct screamed that this wasn't random, but he kept his face neutral, not wanting to spook her. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, testing the waters. "Not like this. South Loop's no place for midnight walks." Maria's head tilted, a flicker of her usual sharpness cutting through the fog. I didn't plan to—" She trailed off, frowning, as if piecing together her night. "I was at the office going through his things. Then the bar. I don't know how I ended up there." Her voice wavered, and she clutched the purse tighter, unaware of the papers shifting inside. Noel nodded, filing away her words. The office. Likely the Crimson Orchid's downtown headquarters, not the restaurant itself. But why the alley? He glanced at the clock. Her driver would arrive soon, but the questions burned. He crouched to her level, his eyes level with hers. "You're safe now," he said, his voice a quiet anchor. "But maybe lay off the late-night shortcuts, yeah?" A ghost of a smile crossed her face and she nodded, her shoulders easing slightly. He stood, moving to the mini-fridge to grab another water, more to keep his hands busy than anything else. The break room felt smaller now, the walls closing in with the weight of what he'd seen. He replayed the alley in his mind, the men's deliberate steps, the way they'd backed off under his glare. They weren't amateurs. Their retreat was tactical, not cowardly. And that invoice. Noel had worked at the Crimson Orchid for 2 years, long enough to know every vendor by name. Westfield Consulting wasn't one of them. Maria shifted on the couch, her purse sliding to the floor with a soft thud. Papers spilled out, and Noel's pulse spiked. He knelt to gather them, his movements casual but deliberate. The invoice was there, its bold header catching the light. He scanned it. $45,000 for consulting services. Dated last week, addressed to a P.O. box in Delaware. His gut churned. Delaware meant shell companies, hidden trails. He tucked it beneath the other papers, handing the stack to Maria. "Careful," he said lightly. "Don't want these getting wet." She took them, her fingers brushing his again, and this time she held his gaze. "You're different, Noel," she said, her voice clearer now. Most people would have kept walking. There was a question in her eyes, but also trust, fragile and new, like a crack of dawn through storm clouds. Noel's chest tightened. He wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. Not by someone like Maria, whose world of power and privilege was galaxies from his own. "Just doing what's right," he said, standing to mask the warmth creeping up his neck. He checked his phone. "Driver's 2 minutes out. Let's get you to the door." He offered his arm and she took it, her grip surprisingly firm. As they moved through the hallway, the fluorescent buzz overhead felt like a heartbeat, urgent and alive. Maria's steps were steadier now, her presence regaining its quiet strength, but Noel sensed the vulnerability lingering beneath. At the staff entrance, the rain had softened to a drizzle, the sedan's headlights slicing through the mist. Noel opened the door, holding it as Maria stepped out. She paused, turning to him. "Noel?" she said, her voice soft but deliberate. "Thank you. Really?" Her eyes held his, and for a moment the world shrank to just them. The rain, the dim light, the unspoken bond forged in crisis. "Get some rest," he said, his smile small but genuine. "I'll see you at the restaurant." She nodded, sliding into the car. The driver gave Noel a curt nod before pulling away, the sedan's taillights swallowed by the night. Noel stood there, the drizzle cooling his skin, his mind a storm of its own. That invoice, those men, Maria's grief. It was a puzzle, and he'd just picked up the first piece. Back inside, he locked the door, the click echoing in the empty hallway. The break room was quiet now, the couch still dented from Maria's weight. He grabbed his jacket, but before leaving, he pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the tissue box Maria had touched. A habit from his days dodging trouble in foster homes. Document everything. He didn't know why yet, but he felt it. Something was coming, something bigger than a drunken night and a chance rescue. As he stepped into the rain, the Crimson Orchid's neon sign flickered above, casting red shadows across the pavement. Noel pulled his collar up, his strides long and purposeful. He'd saved Maria tonight, but the real danger he sensed was still out there, lurking in the ledgers and whispers of her empire. And whether he was ready or not, Noel Jackson was already in too deep to turn back. The Crimson Orchid's dining room gleamed under crystal chandeliers, a symphony of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. At 8 p.m., the Friday rush was in full swing, Chicago's elite savoring lobster bisque and vintage Bordeaux. Noel Jackson wove through the tables, his black vest crisp, his movements fluid, despite the ache in his legs from a double shift. His sharp brown eyes scanned the room, not just for empty plates, but for anything off. A habit honed since that rainy night a week ago, when he'd pulled Maria Caldwell from the jaws of danger. The memory of the alley, the three shadowed men, and that cryptic Westfield Consulting invoice burned in his mind, a puzzle he couldn't shake. Noel balanced a tray of martinis, delivering them to a table of hedge fund types with a practiced smile. But his attention was snagged on James Thornton, the restaurant's new manager, leaning over the hostess stand. James, a wiry man in his 40s with slick back hair and a shark's grin, was all charm. Too much charm. He laughed too loudly at a guest's joke, his hand lingering on the leather-bound reservation book. Noel's gut twisted. James had arrived 3 months ago, hired by Maria to streamline operations, but his presence felt like oil and water, slick and unsettling. As Noel cleared a table, he noticed James slip into the back office, a manila folder tucked under his arm. The office door clicked shut, and Noel's instincts flared. He'd been watching James all week, noting the late-night calls, the vague cash entries in the register, the way he hovered over the books like a vulture. And then there was Westfield Consulting. Noel hadn't mentioned the invoice to anyone, not yet, but its existence gnawed at him. A $45,000 payment to a Delaware P.O. box wasn't an oversight, it was a signal. He finished his round and ducked into the kitchen, the air thick with the sizzle of garlic and rosemary. "Yo, Noel," called Lena, the line cook, flipping a steak. "You look like you're hunting ghosts." Noel flashed a grin, deflecting. Just keeping the place classy. But his mind was elsewhere. During a lull, he slipped into the staff hallway, the noise of the dining room fading. The office was at the end, its frosted glass door etched with the Crimson Orchid's logo. He glanced over his shoulder. No one. With a waiter's knack for moving unseen, he eased closer, ear to the door. James's voice filtered through, low and clipped. "Numbers need to be held by Monday. Westfield's expecting another transfer." A pause, then, No, she doesn't suspect. Too busy crying over her brother. Noel's jaw clenched. The she was Maria, no question. His blood ran hot, but he stayed still, listening. Just keep the invoices clean, James continued. We're close. The call ended with a beep, and Noel stepped back, his heart pounding. Westfield wasn't just a name, it was a scheme, and James was neck deep. Back in the dining room, Noel's eyes tracked James as he reemerged, all smiles, schmoozing a table of city councilors. Noel's hands moved mechanically, refilling water glasses, but his mind raced. He needed proof, something solid. That night, after the last guest left and the staff trickled out, Noel volunteered to lock up, a task he'd taken on more often since the alley incident. Maria was at the downtown office, leaving the restaurant quiet, its elegance eerie in the dim light. He waited until the cleaners finished, then slipped into the office. The air smelled of James's cologne, sharp and synthetic. The desk was tidy, but Noel knew better. He'd grown up picking locks in foster homes, a skill born of survival. Kneeling, he jimmied the bottom drawer with a paperclip, the lock giving way with a soft click. Inside were ledgers, not the digital kind Maria used, but handwritten, their pages dense with numbers. His pulse spiked. Flipping through, he found it. Westfield Consulting, listed dozens of times, payments ranging from $20,000 to $60,000, totaling hundreds of thousands over months. Each entry was marked consulting services, but no contracts, no receipts, just a P.O. box. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. It was theft, maybe worse. Noel snapped photos with his phone, his hands steady despite the adrenaline. He locked the drawer and reset the office, leaving no trace. As he stepped into the hallway, a shadow moved. James, standing by the kitchen door, his eyes narrowing. "Late night, Jackson," he said, his voice smooth but edged. Noel didn't flinch, his height and calmness giving him an edge. "Just checking the stock," he lied, holding James's gaze. The manager smirked, but his fingers twitched, betraying unease. "Don't work too hard," James said, sauntering off. Noel watched him go, his skin prickling. James knew he was being watched. The next evening, Maria appeared at the restaurant, her first time since the alley. She looked better, her blazer pressed, her hair swept up, but shadows lingered under her eyes. She caught Noel's eye during his shift, offering a small nod. After closing, she lingered at the bar, nursing a coffee. Noel approached, wiping down the counter. "You holding up, Miss Caldwell?" he asked, his voice low. She sighed, her guard dropping. "Barely. The numbers aren't adding up. We're bleeding cash, and I don't know why." Her voice was raw, vulnerable. Noel's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her about Westfield, about James, but he needed more, something undeniable. Instead, he leaned closer, his tone gentle but firm. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out." Her eyes met his, searching, and for a moment the weight of her world seemed to lift. "You're too good for this place, Noel," she said softly. He shook his head, a half smile tugging his lips. "Nah, just good at seeing what's in front of me." Their gazes held, a spark kindling in the quiet. Maria's hand rested on the bar, inches from his, and the air hummed with possibility. But the ledger's shadow loomed. Noel knew the truth was close, but so was danger. James wasn't just skimming, he was orchestrating something bigger, and Maria was the target. As she left, Noel stayed behind, his mind churning. He pulled up the photos on his phone, studying the ledger entries. One name caught his eye. Nash Financial, another vendor, linked to a payment just below the bank's reporting threshold. His gut screamed fraud, maybe money laundering. Growing up, Noel had seen hustlers, but this was a machine, cold and calculated. He saved the photos to a hidden folder, his resolve hardening. Maria trusted him, fragile as that trust was, and he wouldn't let her fall. The restaurant's neon sign buzzed as he locked up, casting a red light across his face. The city pulsed beyond, alive with secrets. Noel pulled his jacket tight, the weight of the night settling on his shoulders. He'd found the first crack in Maria's empire, but cracks could spread or shatter. Whatever James was planning, Noel was ready to fight, not just for the crimson orchid, but for the woman whose trust he was starting to carry like a vow. The Crimson Orchid's office was a tomb of secrets, its air thick with the scent of old paper and James Thornton's cloying cologne. At 2:00 a.m., the restaurant slept, its chandeliers dimmed, the last clatter of dishes long silenced. Noel Jackson sat at the manager's desk, the glow of an outdated computer casting sharp shadows across his chiseled face. His fingers flew over the keyboard, cross-referencing invoices from the ledgers he'd photographed. The Westfield consulting payments, hundreds of thousands funneled to a Delaware P.O. box, were no accident. They were a vein in a larger beast, and Noel was determined to trace its heart. His pulse thrummed, a steady drumbeat against the silence. Since discovering James's handwritten ledgers a week ago, Noel had become a ghost in the Crimson Orchid's back rooms, slipping in after hours to dig deeper. The restaurant's polished facade hid a rot he couldn't ignore. James, with his slick suits and predator's smile, was siphoning money, but the scale suggested more than greed. Noel's street-sharpened instincts whispered of money laundering, a scheme woven into the restaurant's bones. He pulled up a public records database, his eyes narrowing as he typed Westfield Consulting. The results were a dead end, a shell company registered to a P.O. box, no directors listed. But a second name from the ledgers, Nash Financial, yielded a thread. A buried filing linked it to a holding company, and there, in fine print, was James Thornton's name, tucked among shadow investors. Noel's jaw tightened. James wasn't just skimming, he was orchestrating a heist, bleeding Maria's empire dry. The office door creaked, and Noel froze, his hand hovering over the mouse. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, approached. He killed the screen, sliding into the shadows beside a filing cabinet. The door swung open, and Maria Caldwell stepped in, her silhouette framed by the hallway's faint light. Her auburn hair was loose, her blazer swapped for a simple sweater, but her eyes were sharp, cutting through the dark. "Noel," she said, her voice low, edged with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" His heart steadied. He stepped into the light, his tall frame relaxed but alert. "Could ask you the same, Miss Caldwell," he said, a half-smile softening the tension. "Thought you were downtown." Maria's gaze flicked to the desk, the computer still warm. She crossed her arms, her CEO armor slipping back into place. "I couldn't sleep. Needed to check the books. Why are you in James's office at 2 in the morning?" Noel weighed his options. He could lie, but Maria's trust, fragile, hard-won, was worth more than a cover story. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, and opened the photo of the Westfield invoice. "Found this in your purse that night in the alley," he said, handing it to her. "It's not right. Neither are these." He swiped to the ledger photos, rows of payments to ghost vendors. Maria's face paled, her fingers tightening around the phone. This can't be," she whispered, but doubt cracked her voice. "Westfield's a front," Noel said, his tone steady but urgent. "James is behind it. I traced it to him through public filings. He's moving money, big money, through fake contracts." Maria's eyes darted to his, searching for deception, but found only resolve. She sank into the desk chair, the invoice trembling in her hand. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice raw. "Needed proof," Noel said, leaning against the desk, close enough to feel her warmth. "Didn't want to scare you without something solid." Maria's shoulders slumped, the weight of betrayal settling in. "I hired James to fix things," she said almost to herself. "He promised to turn the numbers around. I trusted him." Noel's chest ached. He'd seen Maria's strength, but now he saw her cracks, grief for her brother, the pressure of her empire, the sting of being played. "We'll fix this," he said, his voice a quiet vow. "But we gotta be smart. James isn't working alone." Maria nodded, her jaw setting. "Show me everything," she said, her tone hardening. They worked through the night, side by side, their shoulders brushing in the cramped office. Noel pulled up every file he'd found, explaining the patterns, payments just below reporting thresholds, vendors with no physical address, transactions timed to dodge audits. Maria's mind, sharp despite her exhaustion, caught on quickly. "This isn't just theft," she said, her voice low. "It's systematic, like they're using the restaurant as a funnel." Noel nodded, impressed. "Money laundering," he said. "Small enough to stay under the radar, big enough to hurt." As dawn bled through the blinds, Maria found a locked drawer in James's desk. Noel popped it open with a paperclip, revealing a burner phone tucked beneath more ledgers. Maria's hands shook as she powered it on. Text loaded. Cryptic, but damning. Keep her distracted. She's fragile now. Another. Westfield needs 50K by Friday. Clean it through Nash. The sender was anonymous, but one message mentioned, those guys in the alley. Noel's blood ran cold. The men who'd stalked Maria weren't random. They were James's muscle, hired to break her. Maria's face hardened, fury overtaking fear. He's trying to destroy me, she said, her voice ablade. Bankrupt the restaurant, force me to sell. Noel met her gaze, his resolve mirroring hers. He won't, he said. We've got the phone, the ledgers. We can nail him. Maria's eyes softened, a flicker of gratitude breaking through. You didn't have to do this, Noel, she said. This isn't your fight. It is now, he replied, his voice low, unwavering. Their eyes locked, the air between them charged with something new. Trust, yes, but also a spark, warm and unspoken. Maria's hand brushed his as she handed back the phone, and neither pulled away. The moment stretched, fragile and electric, until a car horn outside snapped them back. They hid the phone and locked the drawer, agreeing to keep their discovery quiet. We need more, Noel said. Something the cops can't ignore. Maria nodded, her CEO mask back in place, but her eyes lingered on him. Tomorrow, she said, we'll dig deeper, together. Noel's heart thudded, not just from the stakes, but from the weight of that word, together. As Maria left, Noel stayed behind, wiping down the desk to erase their presence. The restaurant was silent, but danger hummed in its walls. James's scheme was a spiderweb, and Noel and Maria were caught in it, but they weren't prey. He pulled his jacket tight, stepping into the gray dawn. The city woke around him, oblivious to the battle brewing in the Crimson Orchid's heart. Noel's mind raced. James's texts, the alley, Maria's trust. He was in deep, but for the first time, he felt alive, tethered to something bigger than himself. Whatever came next, he'd face it head on, for the restaurant, for Maria, for the truth clawing its way to the light. The Crimson Orchid's kitchen pulsed with chaos, a Friday night inferno of sizzling pans and shouted orders. Steam curled from vats of bouillabaisse, and the air thrummed with the clatter of knives against cutting boards. Noel Jackson moved through it like a shadow, his black vest flecked with sauce, his eyes scanning beyond the chaos. It was 10 p.m., 2 weeks since he and Maria Caldwell had uncovered James Thornton's laundering scheme, and the restaurant felt like a pressure cooker, ready to blow. The burner phone, the ledgers, the texts tying James to the men in the alley. They were a ticking bomb, and Noel knew time was running out. He balanced a tray of wine glasses, delivering them to a table of tech moguls with a practiced smile. But his focus was on James. The manager stood by the bar, his slick hair catching the chandelier's glow, his laugh too loud as he charmed a group of investors. Noel's jaw tightened. James's charm was a mask, hiding a predator who'd hired thugs to break Maria, who'd bled the Crimson Orchid dry with fake vendors like Westfield Consulting. Every smile, every handshake was a lie, and Noel's blood simmered with the urge to tear it down. Maria was in the dining room tonight, her first public appearance since the alley. She moved with grace, her auburn hair swept up, her navy dress hugging her frame. But Noel saw the strain in her eyes, the way her smile faltered when she thought no one watched. They'd spent nights in the office, unraveling James's web, shell companies, offshore accounts, and payments designed to bankrupt the restaurant. Maria wanted to fire him, to call the police, but Noel had urged caution. He's got connections, he'd said, his voice steady. We need evidence that sticks. She'd agreed, but the waiting was fraying her, and Noel felt the weight of her trust like a vow he couldn't break. He slipped into the kitchen, dodging a server with a tray of creme brulee. Lena, the line cook, caught his eye, tossing him a rag. You look like you're about to start a fight, Noel, she teased, but her grin faded at his expression. Just keeping the place standing, he said, wiping his hands. His mind was on the burner phone, hidden in a locked box under the office desk. Its texts, Orders to distract Maria, to push more money through Nash Financial, were their strongest weapon. But James was no fool. He'd been watching Noel, his glances sharp, his comments laced with menace. The confrontation came faster than Noel expected. As he carried a stack of plates to the dish pit, James appeared in the kitchen doorway, his eyes locking onto Noel like a hawk. "Jackson," he called, his voice smooth but cold. "A word." Noel set the plates down, his pulse spiking. The kitchen staff glanced over, sensing the shift. But Noel nodded, following James into the narrow hallway by the walk-in freezer. The air was colder here, the hum of the compressor a low growl. James leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his smile a blade. "You've been busy," he said, his tone deceptively light. "Poking around the office? Asking questions? You think you're clever, don't you?" Noel stood tall, his 6'2" frame unyielding, his brown eyes hard. "I'm just doing my job," he said, his voice low, controlled. "Keeping things clean." James's smile vanished. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You're out of your depth, waiter. Keep pushing, and you'll regret it." The threat hung heavy, but Noel didn't flinch. He'd faced worse. Foster homes, street fights, nights where survival was a coin toss. "Push me, James," he said, his voice a quiet blade. "See who falls first." The air crackled, the hallway shrinking to just them, two men sizing up a war. James's eyes flickered, a crack in his bravado. He stepped back, but his smirk returned, oily and forced. "Smart guy," he said, "but smart doesn't mean safe." He turned, striding back to the dining room, leaving Noel's blood roaring. He exhaled, his fists unclenching. James was rattled, which meant they were close, but close was dangerous. Noel returned to the kitchen, his mind racing. He needed to warn Maria. As the night wound down, he found her in the office, reviewing receipts, her face pale under the desk lamp. "James knows I'm digging," he said, closing the door. "He cornered me. He's nervous." Maria's eyes widened, but her jaw set. "Then we end this," she said, her voice steel. "I want him gone." Noel shook his head, leaning on the desk, his voice urgent. "Not yet. He's got people. Those guys in the alley, maybe more. We fire him now, he covers his tracks, and we lose the proof." Maria's hands trembled, but she nodded, trusting his judgment. "What's next then?" she asked, her voice softer, her eyes searching his. "We go public," Noel said. "I know someone, Lena Harper, a journalist. She's broken corporate fraud stories before. We give her the ledgers, the phone, everything. She'll make it impossible for James to hide." Maria's gaze held his, a mix of fear and resolve. "You're risking a lot, Noel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" He paused, the truth catching in his throat. "Because you don't deserve this," he said finally, "and because I can't walk away from what's right." Her lips parted, a spark flaring in her eyes. Admiration, maybe more. She reached out, her hand brushing his, and the touch sent a jolt through him, warm and electric. "Thank you," she said, her voice raw. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The moment stretched, their hands lingering, the office fading around them. Noel's heart thudded, but he pulled back, clearing his throat. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice steady despite the current between them. They spent the next hour planning, drafting an email to Lena Harper with scanned copies of the ledgers and screenshots of the burner phone's texts. Maria's fingers flew over the keyboard, her CEO precision returning, while Noel watched the door, his senses on edge. As they finished, Maria stood, her dress catching the light. "Noel," she said, her voice soft but firm, "whatever happens, I'm glad it's you here." He met her gaze, his smile small but genuine. "Same," he said, the word carrying more than he meant to show. She left for her car, and Noel locked the office, his mind in a storm. James's threat echoed, but so did Maria's trust, a tether pulling him forward. Outside, the Chicago night was sharp, the Crimson Orchid's neon sign buzzing like a warning. Noel pulled his jacket tight, his breath misting in the cold. The confrontation with James had drawn a line, hunter and hunted, no turning back. He'd started this to save Maria, but now it was bigger. A fight for the truth, for the restaurant, for the spark he felt when her hand touched his. The city loomed, its secrets coiled tight, but Noel was ready. James's empire of lies was cracking, and Noel Jackson would be there when it fell. The Crimson Orchid's dining room was a battlefield dressed in velvet, its chandeliers casting golden light over linen-draped tables. At noon on a crisp Chicago Monday, the lunch crowd buzzed, executives sealing deals, socialites sipping rosé, unaware of the storm about to break. Noel Jackson stood by the bar, his black vest pristine, his tall frame taut with anticipation. His brown eyes flicked to the front entrance, where any moment the world he and Maria Caldwell had been fighting for would shift. 3 days ago, they'd sent their evidence. Ledgers, burner phone texts, Westfield Consulting invoices, to Lena Harper, a journalist with a reputation for dismantling corrupt empires. Today, her article would hit, and James Thornton's house of cards would fall. Noel's pulse thrummed, a steady rhythm against the clink of cutlery. The past 2 weeks had been a pressure cooker. Late nights with Maria, decoding James's laundering scheme, dodging his increasingly pointed glares. The burner phone's texts, proof James had hired thugs to intimidate Maria in the alley, were their ace, but the risk was real. James wasn't just a thief, he was a predator, connected, dangerous. Noel's confrontation with him in the kitchen had drawn blood, and he felt the manager's eyes on him even now, a cold weight from across the room. Maria was at the hostess stand, her navy blazer sharp, her auburn hair swept into a low bun. She greeted guests with her CEO smile, but Noel caught the tension in her posture, the way her fingers gripped her tablet. They'd barely spoken since sending the email to Lena, both bracing for the fallout. Last night in the office, she'd looked at him, her hazel eyes raw. "If this goes wrong, Noel, it's not just me who pays." He'd met her gaze, his voice steady. "It won't go wrong. We've got this." Her hand had grazed his, a fleeting anchor, and the spark between them, trust, yes, but something deeper, had burned brighter. Now James prowled the dining room, his slick hair catching the light, his charm dialed to 11 as he schmoozed a table of bankers. Noel's jaw tightened. James thought he was untouchable, but the clock was ticking. At 12:15 p.m., Noel's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Lena. "Front page, Chicago Tribune. Live now. Good luck." His heart lurched. He slipped into the kitchen, pulling up the article on his phone. The headline screamed, "Crimson Orchid embroiled in million-dollar laundering scandal." Lena hadn't held back. Scans of invoices, bank transfer records, texts from the burner phone linking James to Westfield Consulting and Nash Financial. The piece named him a trusted manager turned traitor, funneling money through shell companies to bankrupt Maria's empire. Noel exhaled, adrenaline flooding his veins. He forwarded the link to Maria, then returned to the dining room, his steps deliberate. Maria caught his eye, her expression unreadable, but a slight nod told him she'd seen it. The article was spreading. Phones at tables began to glow, whispers rippling through the crowd. A woman in a pearl necklace gasped, showing her companion the screen. James, oblivious, was still working the room, his laugh grating against the rising tension. At 12:30 p.m., the takedown began. 2 unmarked sedans pulled up outside, their doors opening to reveal 4 men in plain suits, detectives, their badges glinting as they entered. The dining room hushed, forks pausing midair. Noel's heart pounded, but he stayed by the bar, his eyes locked on James. The lead detective, a grizzled man with a crew cut, approached Maria. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, his voice low but clear. "We need to speak with James Thornton." Maria's voice was steel. "He's there," she said, pointing. James turned, his smile freezing as the detectives closed in. The room watched, transfixed, as he tried to laugh it off. "Gentlemen, there's a mistake," he said, his voice oily. But the lead detective wasn't buying it. "Step outside, Mr. Thornton, now." James's eyes darted to Maria, then Noel, and for a split second, raw panic flashed across his face. He bolted for the office, shoving a server aside. Noel moved without thinking, his long legs eating up the distance. He cut James off in the hallway, his broad frame blocking the door. Going somewhere? Noel said, his voice low, unyielding. James's face twisted, his charm gone. You did this, he hissed, lunging for the office. Noel grabbed his arm, twisting it behind him with a strength honed in tougher streets. Game's over, he said as the detectives caught up, cuffing James with a metallic click. The dining room erupted in murmurs, phones filming the scene. James spat curses as he was let out, his slick hair falling into his eyes. Maria stood at the center, her chin high, her presence commanding despite the chaos. The staff, Lena the cook, the servers, even the dishwashers, rallied, clearing plates, refilling glasses, keeping the restaurant's pulse steady. Noel caught Maria's eye and she gave him a small, fierce nod. Gratitude and resolve intertwined. By evening, the Crimson Orchid was quiet, the lunch crowd gone, the police tape removed. Noel and Maria sat at a corner table, the dining room empty save for the soft clink of a busboy's tray. Maria poured 2 glasses of Merlot, her hands steady now. To you, Noel, she said, raising her glass. You saved more than my business today. Her voice was warm, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen. Noel clinked her glass, his smile genuine. We saved it together, he said, his deep voice carrying a quiet pride. Their fingers brushed as they set their glasses down, and the air shifted, charged with a current neither could ignore. Maria's gaze held his, her CEO mask gone, revealing a woman who'd fought and won, but still carried scars. I was ready to give up, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. After my brother, I thought I'd lost everything. Then you showed up. Noel's chest tightened, her words stirring something deep. You're stronger than you think, he said. I just helped you see it. She leaned closer, her hand resting on his, her touch deliberate. It's more than that, she said, her eyes searching his. The space between them shrank, the world narrowing to the warmth of her skin, the steadiness of her breath. Noel's heart raced, but he didn't pull away. Their lips met, soft at first, then certain, a kiss that sealed a bond forged in fire. It wasn't just gratitude or relief. It was real, raw, a promise of something new. They pulled back, their foreheads touching, a shared smile breaking the tension. We've got work to do, Maria said, her voice light but determined. This place needs rebuilding. Noel nodded, his hand still in hers. I'm not going anywhere, he said, and he meant it. For the restaurant, for her, for whatever lay ahead. Outside, Chicago glittered, its skyline a constellation of ambition and secrets. The Crimson Orchid stood firm, its neon sign steady, a beacon in the night. Noel and Maria had toppled James's empire, but the victory was theirs, hard-won and bittersweet. As they cleared the table, their shoulders brushing, Noel felt the weight of the fight lift, replaced by a new certainty. The takedown was over, but their story, tangled, fierce, alive, was just beginning. The Crimson Orchid glowed under a late September dusk, its neon sign casting a warm red hue across the Chicago sidewalk. Inside, the dining room hummed with a different energy, not the frenetic pulse of a Friday rush, but a steady, hopeful rhythm. Tables were draped in fresh linens, the chandeliers polished to a mirror shine, and the air carried the scent of rosemary and optimism. It had been 3 weeks since James Thornton's arrest, 3 weeks since Lena Harper's article had torn through his laundering scheme like a blade, and 3 weeks since Noel Jackson and Maria Caldwell had sealed their bond with a kiss that felt like a vow. Tonight, the restaurant wasn't just serving dinner. It was reborn, and Noel stood at its heart, his broad shoulders squared, his brown eyes bright with purpose. He adjusted his new black blazer, no longer a waiter's vest but the tailored jacket of the Crimson Orchid's operations manager. Maria had promoted him the day after James's takedown, her voice firm as she'd said, "You've earned this, Noel. I need you." The title felt heavy but right, like a key fitting a lock he hadn't known was there. Now he moved through the dining room, checking inventory on a tablet, his long strides confident but watchful. The scars of the fight lingered, whispers from guests, curious stares, the occasional reporter lingering outside. But the restaurant was healing, and so was its soul. Maria was at the bar, her navy dress catching the light, her auburn hair loose in soft waves. She laughed with a local jazz musician who'd booked a gig for next week, and her ease was a stark contrast to the haunted woman Noel had pulled from the alley. Their eyes met across the room, and she flashed him a smile. Small, private, theirs. His chest warmed, the memory of their kiss a quiet fire. They hadn't rushed things, both wary of the wounds they carried, her grief, his past in foster homes. But their late-night talks, their shared glances, were building something solid, something real. The past weeks had been a whirlwind. With James gone, Maria dove into rebuilding, and Noel was her anchor. They'd audited every contract, purged fake vendors like Westfield Consulting, and renegotiated with suppliers. Noel's instincts, sharpened by years of navigating hard streets, proved invaluable. He'd spotted discrepancies in delivery logs, saving thousands, and suggested streamlining the menu to cut waste. Maria listened, her CEO mind quick to adapt, and together they'd turned the Crimson Orchid's bleeding ledger into a slow but steady climb. The staff rallied too. Lena the cook stayed late to test recipes. Servers like Javier pitched event ideas, and even the dishwashers scrubbed with a new pride. The restaurant was no longer a machine. It was a family. But the fight wasn't over. The police were still investigating James's network, tracing offshore accounts and shell companies. A detective had visited yesterday, warning Maria that James's associates might retaliate. Noel had stood by her, his presence steadying, and promised to keep watch. He'd installed new security cameras, changed the locks, and trained the staff to spot suspicious guests. The danger lingered, but so did their resolve, a shared armor forged in crisis. Tonight was a milestone, the Crimson Orchid's first community night, a free event to thank the neighborhood that had stood by them. Tables spilled onto the sidewalk, draped with checkered cloths, offering plates of sliders and peach cobbler. A local band tuned up, their saxophone notes drifting through the open doors. Kids from the South Loop darted between chairs, their laughter bright, while elders sipped iced tea, swapping stories of the city's old days. Maria had insisted on the event, her voice fierce. "This place isn't just mine, it's theirs." Noel had nodded, seeing the spark of her dream, a restaurant that held the community close, a haven as much as a business. He stepped outside, checking the setup, when Maria joined him, her arm brushing his. "Look at this," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "We did this, Noel." Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of their shared victory. He smiled, his deep voice warm. "You had the vision. I just helped carry it." She nudged him, playful but deliberate. "Don't sell yourself short. You're the one who kept me standing." Their banter paused as a group of teens approached, asking for extra napkins. Noel handed them over, his ease with people honed from years of serving tables, drawing smiles. Maria watched, her expression soft, and when the kids left, she took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice low, "about us, about what's next." Noel's heart skipped, but he kept his cool, his thumb grazing her knuckles. "Yeah? What's on your mind?" She looked up, her hazel eyes steady. "I want to open a community kitchen. Free meals, job training, a place for kids like you were, kids who need a chance. But I don't want to do it alone." Her words hit deep, stirring memories of his childhood, scraping by in foster homes, dreaming of a place to belong. "You won't be alone," he said, his voice firm. "I'm in. For the kitchen, for this place, for you." Her smile was radiant, and she leaned in, kissing him softly, the crowd fading around them. It was a promise, not just of love, but of a future they'd build together. The band struck up a lively tune, and the crowd cheered, pulling them back to the moment. Maria tugged Noel toward the dance floor, a makeshift space by the bar. He laughed, letting her lead, their steps clumsy but joyful. The staff joined in, Lena twirling Javier, the busboy spinning a giggling kid. For the first time in months, the Crimson Orchid felt alive, its wounds not gone but healing, its pulse strong. As the night wound down, Noel and Maria slipped into the office, the din of the party muffled. She pulled out a notebook, sketching plans for the community kitchen, her excitement infectious. Noel added ideas, scholarships for culinary school, a mentorship program, his voice steady, his mind sharp. Their hands brushed as they wrote, and she looked at him, her eyes warm. I used to think I had to do this alone, she said. Then you showed up, and everything changed. He met her gaze, his smile soft but certain. Good thing I'm not going anywhere. They kissed again, slower this time, the world shrinking to the warmth of their shared breath. The notebook lay open, its pages a map of their dreams, and Noel felt a certainty he'd never known. The Crimson Orchid was more than a restaurant now. It was a beacon, a home, a legacy they'd carved together. Outside, the city glittered, its skyline sharp against the night. The party wound down, but the sidewalk still buzzed, neighbors lingering, their laughter a testament to what Maria and Noel had built. The neon sign flickered once, then steadied, its red glow a quiet promise. They'd faced thieves and shadows and they'd won. Not just for themselves, but for every soul who'd find refuge in these walls. As Noel locked the door, Maria's hand in his, he knew this was only the start. The road ahead was uncertain, but with her by his side, he was ready for anything. A new beginning, fierce and unshakable, burning bright in Chicago's heart. What an incredible journey with Noel and Maria. Their courage, trust, and love turned the Crimson Orchid into a beacon of hope. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Did their story inspire you? Drop a comment below and share where you're tuning in from. A huge thank you for joining us on this thrilling ride. Stay tuned for more stories that spark the heart and soul. Until next time, keep believing in new beginnings.